And Jeb makes 3. Another Bush joins the family business and launches a run for president. This is Special Report. Good evening. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. For the second time in 3 days, a member of a past presidential family has formalized intentions to seek their own spot at the head of the White House table. Saturday, it was Hillary Clinton. Today, Jeb Bush became the 3rd member of his family to run for president. We have Fox team coverage. Ed Henry with the Clinton campaign and the rare sight of Mrs. Clinton taking questions from reporters. Britt Hume with the challenges facing Jeb Bush. But we begin with Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron in Miami, where the former Florida governor made it official. Good evening, Carl.
Hi, Shannon. Yes, indeed, he did make it official today. Long expected. But as a practical political matter, Jeb Bush has been omnipresent in this race since the beginning of the year.
I've decided I'm a candidate for president of the United States of America.
Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush says he can fix what's broken in America with conservative principles and new leadership.
We're not going to clean up the mess in Washington by electing the people who either helped create it or have proven incapable of fixing it.
That is a shot at the 3 U.S. senators in the race. But Bush is an insider. He's the son and brother of the last 2 Republican presidents. He's tied or leading both nationally and in the first 4 states to hold votes next February, and has huge advantages in fundraising and name recognition. Still, his last name cuts both ways. And on policy, many conservatives dislike his support for controversial Common Core education standards and immigration reform that some conservatives call amnesty. Pro-immigration demonstrators disrupted the speech briefly, and Bush responded.
The next president of the United States will pass meaningful immigration reforms.
Jeb's wife, Columba, is Mexican, and he launched his run at Miami-Dade College, known as one of the biggest and most diverse schools in the country.
I will campaign as I would serve, going everywhere, speaking to everyone, keeping my word, facing the issues without flinching, and staying true to what I believe.
Fellow Floridian U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, a former protege, may be his rival. As a Cuban-American, Rubio appeals to Hispanics and other minorities that the GOP needs to court in 2016. Rubio says Washington needs new blood, but in a state he said he genuinely likes, cares for, and respects Jeb. George W. Bush got 35% of the Hispanic vote in 2000 and 43% in 2004. Bush's brother and father were not on hand, but his mom, who discouraged his 2016 candidacy, was.
Frankly, with all these reporters around, I'm watching what she says, too. Please say hello to my mom, Barbara Bush.
Barbara Bush got some of the biggest applause of the day. Though Jeb Bush sometimes gets knocked as the consummate establishment candidate, it's worth noting that establishment candidates have been winning the Republican nomination since the Reagan era. Shannon?
All right, Carl Cameron live in Miami. Thank you, Carl. Let's break down now what Bush is facing now that he's officially in the race. Senior political analyst Britt Hume joins us tonight. Good evening, Britt.
Hi, Shannon. When Ohio Governor John Kasich said recently that he had thought Jeb Bush's candidacy would, quote, take up all the oxygen, he was expressing the view of many that by now the former Florida governor would have opened a significant lead. In fact, that was never likely. Bush simply faced and faces too many headwinds. The most obvious is his name, which many Americans associate with the past and with his brother's Iraq War and his father's broken tax pledge. Another is his position on immigration, which the GOP right considers amnesty, not to mention his support of the Common Core educational standards, also anathema to many conservatives. Bush's conservative detractors may not know much about his quite conservative record as governor, but they are well aware of those 2 positions. To be sure, being a Bush has advantages. It has certainly helped him amass a campaign war chest that might set an all-time record. But the pursuit of all that money would suggest a candidate aware of the resistance to him and bracing for a long struggle. The good news for Bush is that polls suggest he's very much in the thick of the race and has a base of support to build on. He's not known as a strong orator, but as today's event showed, he can make a strong speech. He has a case, especially based on his record as governor. What he needs now is a hearing. Shannon?
Well, Britt, to that end, do you think he's going to get that hearing?
Well, he'll certainly have time, and he'll certainly have the money to mount advertisements and to do the things to stay in the race long enough that he can hope his message will get through. But he does, as I say, have strikes against him. And I don't think that he's going to do what some other candidates might choose to do in such circumstances, which is to move to his right, abandon old positions in order to try to win over those who are suspicious of him. I don't think he's going to do that because I think he believes that if he did, he would compromise the general election chances, and he's not prepared to do that.
I thought it was interesting that by my count, looking at his prepared remarks, there wasn't a mention of immigration or trying to sell that. It only came up once a heckler brought it up. He made the statement that he would be about legislation reform, but he made a pointed note of saying not by executive order.
Yeah, and that was quick of him, because if he said by legislation, not by executive order, that sets him apart from President Obama, with whom he does not entirely disagree on the substance of the issue, but it was enough to get a cheer out of the crowd, which was for him anyway, I should add.
It was. Britt, thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, Shannon.
Well, Hillary Clinton's campaign is trying to balance a hard push for liberals with an appeal to the great American middle, something she will need to win next year. And much of that effort involves money, who gets to keep it and who gets to spend it. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is covering the Clinton campaign tonight in Concord, New Hampshire.
Hillary Clinton took her rebooted campaign to New Hampshire today, where she focused on spreading the wealth and was quickly confronted about how she can pull off a populist campaign after she and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, made $25 million last year.
I'm very grateful for the success that Bill and I have had. We feel blessed.
Clinton did take several media questions today, except it was just hours after her campaign banned a journalist from the London-based Daily Mail from serving as a pool reporter for her events here in New Hampshire. A campaign official insisted the snub had nothing to do with the newspaper's aggressive coverage of Clinton, and instead boils down to a dispute over whether the pool system should be based on which outlets already handle such duty at the White House. The overall reset of her campaign Saturday on Roosevelt Island in New York started with a promise about coming together.
I'm not running for some Americans, but for all Americans.
And then quickly veered off into a State of the Union style laundry list of liberal programs, as the former Secretary of State spent just 2 minutes of the 46-minute speech on foreign policy and 4 minutes attacking the Republican field, as she suggested GOP leaders are racist for opposing her efforts to increase voting rights, a charge she relaunched today in the Granite State.
I really am quite amazed at all of the Republican-led efforts to disempower and disenfranchise young people, poor people, people with disabilities, people of color. What part of democracy are they afraid of?
During a stop Sunday in Iowa, Clinton finally stopped waffling on the Pacific trade deal, saying it should fail without major changes. And she criticized President Obama by saying it's time for him to listen to House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. Clinton was pressed today on another comment where she suggested she'll fight harder for workers than Mr. Obama, and she scrambled to clarify.
I will build on that, and I will go further.
There may still be trouble for her on the left. New York's liberal mayor Bill de Blasio did not attend Saturday's rally in his city and is holding out on an endorsement. While de Blasio said it was a powerful speech, he warned she needs to get more specific about dealing with income inequality.
And I know I want to see those details. I think people all over the country want to see those details.
Among those key details, Clinton hasn't said yet how she'll pay for these new programs, from universal pre-K to debt-free college education, though de Blasio offered a clue when he said he's pushing the candidate to have a more progressive taxation system. Shannon?
All right, Ed Henry traveling live with the former secretary. Thank you, Ed. Concerns over a breakdown in bailout talks for Greece set stocks downward. The Dow lost 108 and is now in the red for the year. The S&P 500 fell 10, NASDAQ dropped 21. Up next, the U.S. goes after another major terrorist. Did we get him? But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 16 in Little Rock, Arkansas, where a civilian armed with a rifle was shot and critically wounded trying to enter an Air Force base. An injured bystander is also hospitalized. No information yet about either person or who fired the shots. The base was on lockdown for a time, but has since returned to normal status. Fox 31 in Denver, as the state Supreme Court upholds the firing of a worker using medical marijuana. The court says Dish Network was within its rights to dismiss Brandon Coates, a quadriplegic who smoked marijuana at home to control seizures. And this is a live look at Dallas from Fox 4. The big story there tonight, the end of the Plano Water Tower. A demolition crew brought it down this morning. The 178-foot tall tower was about 30 years old and had not been used for several years. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.